Hello, hello. It's Charmaine Hammond here with Prepskills, Prep Online. This is our webinar series and delighted to have you all joining us today. We have some incredible guests, really have been looking forward to this conversation today, and I'll just run through a couple of logistics and then we're going to dive into some fantastic content. You'll want to put your seatbelts on because we are going to share a lot of helpful information on today's topic, which is all about private school fit and financing. And the co-hosts today are myself, Charmaine Hammond, and Joanna. I've worked in with education for many, many years. I've worked with a lot of the school divisions across Canada. I've had the opportunity to be part of Alberta's Student Health Initiative program for 5 years as their consultant, and have also provided training to PD days and to students and their families as well. And most recently had the opportunity to work with a number of school boards in different communities after forest fires and other disasters, helping the community become resilient again. Joanna Severino is the CEO and founder of Prepskills Inc., and they host some incredible events throughout the year, PrepConnect, US College Expo, and Joanna will tell you a little bit more about Prepskills in a moment. Joanna is passionate about helping students find their future, and I know that will come out in today's topic. She has been an educator for 25 years. And Joanna, do you want to share anything else that I've not shared yet?
Sure. I'm a mother of 3 lovely boys, ages 14, 11, and 8, and primarily Prepskills support students in helping them through the transition years. So generally students in middle school, applying to high schools, and those in high school transitioning to universities. So we're really excited to support you here today.
Thank you. And as I mentioned, we have incredible guests here today who each bring different insights and perspectives and experience. So I'm going to introduce each of them using their bio, and then you will hear lots from them as we go through the questions today. And this is being recorded, so you'll be able to listen to the recording later, share it with others, and you'll also be able to access any of the webinars that you've missed. So we'll start with Patti MacDonald, the Executive Director of Canadian Accredited Independent Schools. And she has been in that role since 2017. And CAIS pursues continuous whole school improvement with 90+ member schools through accreditation, leadership development, research, data collection, and a number of national collaborative projects. As the executive director, she develops and implements the association's strategic direction, ensures the value and relevance of accreditation and to the accreditation process and to other programs. Prior to coming to CAIS, Patti was the member of a leadership team at Bishop Strachan School in Toronto for a decade. And then she spent 10 years as principal and 2 years in the vice principal role, and was a teacher for more than 20 years before transitioning into leadership. And then we have David McBride, who is the vice principal of enrollment management at Upper Canada College. And he's been there since 2012. He works with an amazing team in the admissions office as well as in boarding to ensure that UCC is a full, great boys who are up to the challenge of making a difference and taking advantage of the myriad of opportunities at UCC so that they become their best selves. He lives on campus, enjoys seeing the boarding students on a regular basis, and calls them his neighbors. Prior to being with UCC, he spent 18 years working at Bishop University, and he was in a leadership capacity there as well. And welcome, David, and welcome, Patti. And now we have Suzanne Tyson, who is the founder and CEO of HigherEdPoints. And she's been involved in various capacities with higher education and student funding for more than half of her 30-year career, holding roles in several educational publishing companies, the loyalty industry, and a scholarship matching company. In 2013, she took all of this previous career experience to conceive and develop what we know as HigherEdPoints, the only company in the world to enable the conversion of existing loyalty points into funds for higher education. And they've been able to help students and parents funding education with over $2 million of tuition payments and student loan repayments. Incredible. Recognizing that it takes a village to raise a mind and indeed a village to fund an education. And she's also created ways to pay for school. Welcome, Suzanne. So welcome our guests. I am excited for the topic today.
Thank you, Charmaine.
Ready to dive in?
Ready.
All right. We've been talking before we came on live on the webinar about the different changes that are happening and that we're dealing with in education. And I'd love to hear from each of you, just what are you seeing in terms of how is the current situation impacting students or their academics, or what's going to happen this fall, some of the learning gaps that might be happening. And if there's been any a pleasant surprise that you've seen, so we can hear something positive as well. Who wants to take it away? Big question.
I can jump in.
Awesome. Thanks, Patti.
So I think that, as with all industries, independent schools have had to pivot in the last 2 months. Before the call, David was talking about the last 10 weeks, and they have been very, very different for schools than obviously was planned. But what has been amazing, I think, across case schools particularly is their commitment to continuity of learning for their students. They had a very robust emergency online response, and many of our schools were up and running immediately after the announcements in their regions. And so schools have been experimenting with different approaches, varying from trying to really replicate exactly the way their schools looked like before moving online to an intentional mixture of synchronous and asynchronous learning, but really wellness has been the focus for, I think, all of our schools during this time, because it has been a big shift for families. It's an unusual situation in that it's not, really online learning. Parents are at home with their children, they're working while their kids are learning. I think we've all seen the videos of people talking and their dog running by or their child jumping on their lap. So it's an unusual situation for teaching and learning. But when you talk about silver linings, I think that relationships surprisingly have really grown during this time, because people have had this lens into the real lives of their teachers and their students. So it's been really great that way. I think looking forward to the fall, schools recognize that it is no longer unpredictable, that the pandemic will continue in various forms. Nobody has a crystal ball. Nobody knows exactly what that's going to look like. But people, again, are making really robust plans for a hybrid approach. And again, it will look different from school to school. But I think schools are really gearing up to ensure that excellence of continued academic learning as well as co-curricular experiences, whether they're face-to-face or online.
Great, thank you.
If I could, maybe I'll talk a little bit about our experience at UCC. And in Ontario, the decision to close schools happened right in the middle of our March break. And I'm not let me start by saying I'm not a teacher. I was amazed by the senior leadership team and a number of our faculty at UCC who, over the span of their last week of reading week, put together what we call our continuous learning program, our CLP, that we launched on the 25th of March. And the boys have been unbelievably engaged, as our families. And I think if I talk about a highlight that I've seen, it's our schools, our case schools are filled with amazing teachers. And, they've basically had to recreate what they were doing in person online. And, for some of them, they've been teaching for a long time, and not that they don't evolve every year, but this has been a major shift. And I think watching the learning that's happening among our faculty and the way they're sharing best practices, and accepting feedback. And we're asking our families for feedback regularly and making slight tweaks to that program. And I was on a call yesterday with one of our boys who's in year 9, I'm his mentor for his personal project. And I said, so tell me really, like, how's a CLP, how's online learning? And he said, oh my goodness, I'm working as hard as I worked in person. But I think the nice thing that we've done, and most schools I think have done the same thing, is, we don't have the kids in school from 8 o'clock in the morning till 3:30 at night, or 3:30 in the afternoon. And one of the nice pieces of feedback that we've also heard is a lot of families are actually happy to have a chance to spend some time, in our case, with their boys. And so the boys are really busy until about 1 o'clock in the afternoon. And then, some families are getting some great quality time, which is a positive byproduct. But of course, we'd prefer to have them on campus here on Lonsdale. But we're making do, and I think really thriving in the environment.
Great,
Yeah.
thank you.
So I'm happy to jump in as well.
Yes.
I actually have a grade 12 student right now, and we're fortunate enough to have him going to Greenwood College. And I have to say, the friends of ours with his peers who didn't, they're not in the independent school system, Greenwood was up and running, as you say, David, like that. The first Monday after March break ended, they had their computers running, the teachers, there wasn't any interruption at all in the delivery of education. And the funny thing that happened, the second week in, I got an email from attendance saying, your son was marked absent from his physics class. Can you please let us know where he was? I was like, we all know where he was. But the expectation was that he would still be carrying on, and they haven't missed a step in terms of program delivery and the academic experience. So he's going to be really well positioned. I'm so grateful to the teachers and the staff for figuring it out, because when he hits class in September, whether it's virtually or not at university, he's not going to have missed any of his academics. That's great.
Yeah.
Yes, certainly agree. Great quality time that we've had to spend with our kids at home, for sure. I'm sure you're fielding a lot of questions, and one of the concerns we had come in from several of the families was around applications. And private school has always been a competitive landscape. Families are wondering what you anticipate happening over the next couple of years. Will applications likely be down, the same? What's happening this fall with those that you anticipate coming in for September? David, maybe you want to start with that?
Yeah, this is sort of in our wheelhouse, and we're spending a lot of time thinking about what is the future gonna look like. I feel very fortunate to work at a school that is pretty competitive in the Toronto marketplace, and we have far more applications than spaces in most years, and we certainly hope that will continue. Before I talk about the process, I think the one thing that I would say, and maybe we've sort of all alluded to it, I think families that are not in the independent school world are seeing the real difference between what happens in the independent school world versus, and I have two stepdaughters who are in the public school system, and when I look at what they're doing versus what our boys are doing, I think families are seeing a real difference. So there are a number of my colleagues at schools across the country who are actually seeing an increase in interest right now because families are seeing that change. I will tell you, it's still pretty early days for us to know exactly what the fall is going to look like. We have 2 open house dates, which are very important for Upper Canada College, where we have 3 sessions with 500 or 600 people at each. I highly doubt that come mid-October we're going to be allowed to bring 500 people onto campus. So we're looking at virtual open houses. We're trialing one in a couple of weeks' time. We had to move our senior kindergarten admissions process to a virtual one in April. Not ideal with 4-year-old boys, but I think managing, there were some lessons that were learned there. So we're in the process right now of looking at how we would do our interviews all in a virtual environment, how we would do testing in a virtual environment, how we can best show the school in a virtual environment. I think that's the reality that we're all going to be facing. We don't have all the answers quite yet, but I think we are all working hard. And the nice thing is most of the families we're dealing with are comfortable in the online environment. And I think as long as we can find meaningful ways for them to get a feel for our schools and what our schools are all about, I still think they can make really informed, really good decisions about each of the schools.
Wonderful. Patti, anything to add? You're on mute. Yeah.
Yeah, I got it. Just to reiterate David's point that, you know, families who were on the fence before about whether independent school was the right choice for their family, I think are seeing the high quality continuity of learning that's happening across the schools and really want that for their children. And so, as David said, some of our schools really are seeing an increase in interest from families. And schools are being really creative about the ways that they're inviting people in so that they have a sense of who they are as a school, so that they can really see and experience their unique vision, mission, and values. Because each school really is very different one from the other. I think that the other thing that is true is that schools are also very sensitive to the changing needs of their families right now. Some families have been hit hard financially, existing independent school families and prospective families as well. And so financial assistance, it's been a long-standing priority for our schools, but I think that right now we're seeing even more importance placed on that from the perspective of schools. In a recent survey that we did, CASE did with its heads of school, 80% of schools said that they intend to increase financial aid for those families that are struggling and really are looking at crisis funds to be able to continue to support the families that are in their communities.
That's great. And I would imagine that some of the students or the families that are perhaps on wait lists for this fall may actually get an opportunity to be admitted, perhaps, depending on the changing landscape. Have you had any pushback with respect to tuition models and what families are to expect this coming fall? David, as you mentioned, I think the campus environment, the private school environment is going to be a little different. And so without that in-person experience, are parents expecting an adjustment to tuition?
It's a really interesting question, and it's I think one that we're discussing and we're taking a long time to think about what the right answer is. In our, and I can only speak to my case. In our case at UCC, for instance, we will bill families individually for things. So they're not paying for a meal plan in our tuition fees. That's an added fee. So I think some of those things where they would expect, service, our sports teams, for instance, it's an additional fee. But I, if I think about how hard I think our faculty and our staff are working right now, and the time that they're giving to students, again, I think in most of our case schools, you would find that, teachers are more available than they are during the regular course of the year. They're working harder, and I think we're still delivering an exceptional educational experience. Again, let me just speak to my case in particular. At UCC, we have 90 different clubs and associations in our upper school. 60 of them are actually up and running in a virtual environment in a pretty active way. We had two boys in year 9 that won an international debating competition online. So a lot of, with the exception of like our hockey teams, obviously not practicing right now, and we'll see if
why not the NHL.
But I think with the exception of those sorts of things, almost everything that would happen on a daily basis in our school is happening, currently in an online environment.
Yeah, great.
Yeah,
Patti, anything to add?
Yeah, and so just, as David said, there are different tuition models from school to school. In a school where there's essentially a one cost to tuition, where field trips and food and busing are all rolled in, then, those families will see a difference for next year, because schools are obviously not going to charge families for services that aren't being provided. But in terms of teaching and learning, I think that the experience that families have had this year has them fully supportive of moving forward the way that tuition models sit now. I think that what they're really looking for is not necessarily a change in tuition, but a change in how they pay their tuition. So, potentially different payment schedules, making their deposits at a different time or at a different threshold, and just being flexible so that each family is able to continue to benefit from the experience that they have now in a way that is manageable financially for their family.
Makes sense. Flexibility. Anything to add, Suzanne?
So from my perspective as a parent, Greenwood did send a communication to us about this year's fees, and there was a modest reimbursement for things that weren't, the physical things that weren't delivered. But I know, because I'm in the education space with higher education, delivering online can be more expensive in a lot of ways than it is in the classroom, right? The universities are struggling with this issue right now because they have to take all of their infrastructure and everything and put it online. Greenwood was a wired school, and it wasn't challenging for the students because they all have their own devices. But I think, David, to your point, the quality of education that's being delivered is really what parents are interested in paying for. And I think that there are fair and open conversations that are happening. Yeah.
Wonderful. Let's break down the private school admissions process. And I know that private schools do a fantastic job in terms of what I consider a little bit like a certification process with the screening, the testing, the application, interviews. Talk about that and perhaps any changes that are on the horizon. David, do you want to start us off?
Yeah. Look, I think about my colleagues, my admissions colleagues across the country, and it is a really wonderful group of individuals who are very committed to ensuring the best for families and the right fit, and that's really what the admissions process is all about for us, is about determining best fit on our side from the admissions perspective, but I also think for families. And I'm a big believer and a strong encourager. When a family says to me that, well, UCC is the only school that we're applying to, I'm like, I'm not sure that's the best decision. I think you should look at other schools and help determine best fit. Our certainly in the case of what we do here at UCC, the interview is what we put the most weight on, and I work with an exceptional team here, and I think they really get kids and they get our school, and a very, very strong interview can trump weaker test scores, or maybe if we have some question marks around the report cards. I think the challenging piece for us as a profession next year is going to be the report cards, and how accurate are our report cards for the past, for the past 3 or 4 months in most of the public schools. That's going to be the issue that a lot of us are going to deal with, and the testing piece. And I know, having been on a call with most of the Toronto admissions directors yesterday, we're all grappling with online versions of admissions tests, which are typically tests that measure math and reading and vocabulary, and looking for models that will work for families, but also give us a little bit of insight to help, I think, justify the lack of report cards that we're seeing. And, I know that a number of universities, my next door neighbor on campus is a university counselor here, and he keeps sending me messages about all the U.S. colleges that are dropping standardized testing. I would be of the opinion that actually right now, for us admitting kindergarten to grade 9, which is our typical intake year, we need some tests more than ever, because there's some uncertainty around what those report cards really look like and are really saying.
Patti?
Yeah, it's interesting. I was going to mention University of California suspended the SATs, and we are seeing this increasingly in higher ed. And we have actually seen it across K schools in the last few years. Some schools have moved away from the more formalized, standardized testing and have created their own tests. But as David said, I think that in the end, the key is really going to be those interviews, because education is really all about relationships and fit. And so to find that right fit, to be able, schools really want the right fit as well. They really want the families who want what they're offering, who believe in their mission. And so that opportunity to speak with both parents and students to understand what their hopes and dreams and fears are is so vital to the process, because that relationship piece really does start right then, right at the very beginning with that interview.
Suzanne, what was your process like as a parent?
Man, I'm going back. So my daughter went through as well. She's in 3rd year at Queen's, and it actually brings up this whole stress thing, right? Because it's your child's future and you're so invested at the young age. So The interview process, it's interesting to hear how important it was, because I think I probably would have been a lot more stressed out. But Greenwood allowed you to send in reference letters. So a child in grade 6, I went and got a drama teacher, my daughter's drama teacher and her soccer teacher. And the interview was really important, but fit. So David, interesting also that you say it's not a great idea to apply to one school, but we did for my daughter only apply to Greenwood. No, and people said, you're nuts, go and apply. But I knew that if she didn't get in there, I went to Balmoral Hall in Winnipeg and then to St. John's Ravenscourt in Winnipeg. And for me, co-ed was a much better experience personally. And so I believe life is co-ed. Sorry, David. Life is co-ed. Therefore, that was my philosophy about the school that we chose for her. And what we did was, I'm not sure in Toronto if Elaine Danson is still working. She was one of the educational consultants that we talked to. And it was awesome to have that external person who had been headmistress or principal of, I think she's Montcrest or was Montcrest. And she knew all the schools and she knew all of the cultures at the schools. And so she said, okay, if you're looking for co-ed, here are your options. And if you're looking for this is the thing. And so my 2 children could not be more opposites. And she said, for both of them, this environment will give you the fit that you need for your kids. So I think I've had a lot of friends who've had kids at schools that were not a good fit, right? For whatever reason. So that's the most important thing as a parent, to make sure you are putting options in front of your children and have them spend some time at the school when we're allowed to.
I think, I think especially as students get older, it makes me nervous when a family says we let our 4-year-old decide where to go to senior kindergarten. That makes me worried. For a boy applying to year 9, I get it that you want to listen to your son, but I think there are so many sources of information now where you can get authentic answers. And obviously people in my profession, we're paid to say really good things about our school. I think Joanne knows that I'm pretty honest about what we're good at and what we're not good at. We're not all like that at admissions, but I think, the world it's so easy to communicate and to really get honest and authentic feedback about each and every school. And, while I think people like Elaine Danson do great work, it's important for families to hear from people they know and people they trust about the process and about what schools really are all about.
Yeah, and just building on David's idea of this network of admissions directors across the country from case schools, they really do talk to each other right now on a weekly basis, but also in subsections, even in non-COVID times, quite a lot. And schools come to know each other and what their strengths are, what their values are. And, if David had a family who wasn't a great fit for UCC, he may well say, have you looked at X school and Y school? Because I hear you saying these are the things that you value, and these might be really great places for you to look, because he also knows the community so well.
I have called Greenwood on a few occasions with families where I think, Greenwood may be a better option. And I think the people in my profession, I think it's important that we do that. And it's not about you're not good enough for my school. There is a better place, there's a better fit and a better place for you. And I know, so in my case, I think I know the kinds of boys who will thrive here, and I know boys who will be better somewhere else. And I have no problem picking up the phone. And again, it's just, we live in a small world, and a very small world in the independent school market. So sharing is good.
Yeah. I actually called in my old headmaster from SJR to call the admissions folks. I filled out all the stops. Said, can you tell them that we support independent school? And anyway, it's interesting so competitive.
And I think case schools in Winnipeg, you were a student at 2 good case schools.
Thank you.
Yeah. And I agree. I think as a parent, as a mother of 3 boys, it's a gut feel, and you can really get a sense as to the type of schools that your children can thrive at. And my boys attend an all-boys school. They're at Sterling, and so they're quite happy there, and transitioning to an all-boys school as well for my grade 8 son who'll be attending UCC. So good experiences. So why don't we move on? My lovely Nathan, who's in grade 8, so he'll be attending in the fall.
But Joanne, just because you opened the door, But it was, it was very much about, and if you remember when I met Nathan in October, I encouraged him, look at other schools, apply to other schools. And Nathan's SAT score was great, but Nathan was unbelievable in the interview. And I'm going to just tell a little story. I'm sorry if I'm going to embarrass him. So Nathan interviewed at UCC right before he played basketball against UCC. And I'm a basketball guy. I love basketball. And I made sort of some comment like, oh, Sterling Hall doesn't have a hope today against UCC. At 6:30, I'm sitting down for dinner. My phone beeps and I have an email, and it's Nathan's taking a picture of the scoreboard and Sterling Hall has beat UCC. I swear to God, that photo, that got him into UCC. I was like, I love a boy like that. That was super impressive. And I was like, this is the kind of kid I want at the college. So plus he'll help our basketball team apparently.
Oh, great. Charmaine, moving along.
All right. Oh, this conversation is so rich, and, you're all talking about the importance of the amount of research that parents and families do as they're looking at best fit. And then they've got to plan kind of how they're going to finance this education. And some family, Joanna's family, 3 boys going through this. Suzanne, you talked about having 2 children. So a lot of parents are planning not only for one child, but for more than one child. And so this question has several layers to it. David and Patti, I wanted to get your input on what are some of the ways that families can pay for private and independent school education and tuition. And then Suzanne, I've got some follow-up questions for you on that as well.
I've got some statistics that I can share from case schools from the 2018-19 school year. So in that year, over 7,500 students received some sort of financial aid in our schools. In terms of the number of students, the average was about 15% or 16% in each school, and this is rising every year. In 2019, a total of $81 million in financial aid was dispersed to students across case schools, and this is 27% more since 2015. So you can see this growing commitment, and this doesn't even represent the new strategies that are being put into place by schools right now. So the average award was $11,000 for each student, but again, that represents an average. So some students would have a higher reward, some would need less. But really, financial aid is an important thing for families to be looking at when they're looking at different independent schools.
I guess when I came to UCC in 2012, a major reason why I moved from a university I love very much to this great school is the commitment to financial assistance. And in this country, UCC leads the country in terms of our commitment to financial assistance. Last year, we awarded $5.3 million in assistance to boys. It is needs-based, and we walk a very fine line. I think a lot of families don't want to admit that they're receiving financial assistance, or a lot of families want to say, oh, my son's on a hockey scholarship or an academic scholarship at UCC. The reality is those don't exist here at our school. They do in some, and I think if we're talking about how to fund schools, I think there are some schools that will use awards and what have you as a way to help fill their schools with great students. In our case, we've made a commitment to financial assistance and being more accessible to more families. That number will grow certainly in the short term as we try to help bridge some of our families that are at the college. In terms of other sources of funding, I often, our tuition fees are high. I know that. One of the things that I find really interesting is that I often hear from families where grandparents are actually playing a bit of a role helping. And, I think they're sort of looking at it like, you're getting your inheritance a little bit earlier, and it's, and I'm going to have a really positive impact on your life because we're making this more affordable. So I think families are finding that as a not a bad option. Some families are obviously going to the bank and lines of credit and what have you to help with our tuition. But I think the commitment that places like UCC and many of the case schools now I think are really putting a pretty strong emphasis on being more accessible to more families. And I think that's great. And I'm very proud of my institution that we lead the way in that area.
Mm-hmm. I think that that's absolutely true. And in our case as a family with our son, we chose independent school for junior school because we felt that that was the time that he really needed it. And for our daughter, it was the opposite. She went to senior school at an independent school. And so families can also make those choices. But, you know, going to the bank works. That's what we did.
Great. Thank you. And David talked about grandparents helping and family members investing. And Suzanne, that brings us to HigherEdPoints. I'd love if you can share with people how HigherEdPoints works, because I think it's actually a new concept for a lot of families. They may not have heard this. And I also know there's a role that grandparents and friends of families and students can play with how people can tap into loyalty rewards. So tell us how that works, and how does that support a financial assistant towards a child's education in a private school?
Sure, thanks, Charmaine. So HigherEdPoints is a pretty simple concept. We sum it up for higher ed students and parents by saying, okay, mom and dad, no more trips and toasters for you. Use your loyalty points to pay for my tuition, right? And students generally don't know what the loyalty points are for post-secondary, but the parents sure do. And what we found, my favorite segment of our members is actually the grandparents. We have a grandma in PEI who's helped two of her grandchildren pay for their tuition at university. But the way that it works is, instead of redeeming your Aeroplan miles, your TD rewards points, or CIBC Aventura points for a flight or merchandise, you redeem for an education credit. And they come in $250 increments. You put in the student information back at HigherEdPoints, and we deposit the funds directly into the student account at the school. And we started, my philosophy, I worked in the loyalty industry and in the student matching industry, and the philosophy was when people graduate, they can repay their loans. So we have Canada Student Loans, universities and colleges, and we do actually have UCC and a number of independent schools that participate. And so anybody, any family member, a friend, we've had people gather their miles from different sources to help them pay their tuition. And we have, interestingly, we've added Spirit of Math and other external programs to the course, because a lot of the extracurricular funds are funded by grandparents, and they collect a lot of points, may not be traveling, especially now, and can be used. So it's in the higher ed space, and this may be the same with the independent schools, people have to cobble together a bunch of different sources of funds. So some cash, some loans, some OSAP for university. This is the same thing that we're finding now with our other partners. People are gathering together all the sources of funds.
And now, because people can't even really travel and redeem their points very easily, you know, I think this is a great way that families can pull together and support a family member's education. It certainly, I don't have children, but it's certainly giving me ideas for my nieces and nephews once they get to that point that I can share my points with them. And Suzanne, the backup question I had is, you had mentioned that you've got some of the private schools that are actually registered with HigherEdPoints. UCC is one of them. What if a parent was interested in a particular private school and they're not on your website, like they're not listed with HigherEdPoints? Is there anything that a parent could do if they wanted to tap into this opportunity around using loyalty points towards education?
Sure. So the way that it's worked for the last couple of years is, when there's a parent that's interested in whatever type of educational institution, we'll reach out to the institution and say, a parent has expressed interest in using this program. It's free for the schools to come on board. There's no charge for the institutions to come on board. And so it's a simple onboarding program for them, because we need to know where to send the funds. And then we can work together. And often, if a parent is requesting it, or if we reach out to the school, then it's a really easy process. And I think that a lot of the independent schools don't yet know about HigherEdPoints. Right. The ones we have on board have happened that way. The parent has said, can you come on board? St. Mike's was actually the first to come on board, because one of their board members saw it and they wanted to use it as a method of fundraising. So these donations can also be used to help your scholarships and your bursaries and your other endowment funds. If your old boys at UCC or other people have bazillions of points they're not using, they can certainly donate them to your scholarship funds at schools.
Wow, that's fantastic. Thank you. Thank you. Joanna, I'll passing the torch over to you now. Thanks,
Okay.
Suzanne.
So addressing some questions here from families around transition. Anyone want to speak about what you're doing currently around graduation, for example? I know my guy has his school sending a photographer with a graduation gown later today, which will be nice. Any tips for families around just dealing with the transitional years and transition from 8 to 9 and 12 to university primarily? What are you seeing?
Yeah. So UCC is an International Baccalaureate school. So we actually had graduation on Friday, a virtual graduation, and our parent organization was very involved. There were signs that were in people's front lawns, and there was a sort of a communal brunch together, and I think really trying to find ways to bring the boys and the families together as much as possible. It's hard. We have boys that have spent 13 years here, and it's hard that they're not actually able to. It was funny. I jumped on a Zoom call on Friday, and we have 17 boys out of 18 boys who started SK 13 years ago who graduated together, and so I watched them on a Zoom call with their kindergarten teacher, and it was really wonderful. And we all, because the IB canceled exams this year, we actually put in place at UCC a program for 4 weeks where the boys we had guest speakers. They participated in an online Ivy courses. We did some cooking classes, and we really tried to engage the boys as much as possible. On the flip side, on sort of my side now, and what we're doing, we've had to move all of our what we call our new to blue events, our new family events. We've had to move them all virtually, which has not been great. But we're trying to find ways to bring the boys together as well. So in the prep school, our senior kindergarten boys on Monday were on a Zoom call together and introducing themselves and little scavenger hunts and what have you. And we're connecting families as well later this week and sending a mailing home to families with a reading list from our librarian who's retiring and sort of her best picks and some math and language arts work. So we're trying as much as possible to help families coming into the school transition in a virtual way, which is not, it's not ideal. We know it's not ideal. We'd much rather have a barbecue in Sam's backyard, which is right next to me. But I think we're all, and I think on the university front, I think from what I see, the universities are doing an exceptional job in terms of helping to transition students from school, either high schools or public schools, into higher education. But it's a bit of a leap of faith for everyone right now.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's such a big issue, and the schools take so seriously this transition of kids in exactly the grades you said, Joanna, that they've been coming together across the network to talk about different ideas, different approaches and strategies. I think that the area of agreement is that closure at the end of this year was so important for all of the kids, even if that couldn't be face-to-face. So they're all looking for different strategies. As David said, many schools have done yard signs. Some schools are doing just an online graduation or, prize day or closing ceremonies that involves everybody. Others have, different creative ideas. I know that some are doing drive-through graduations. Families are coming in the car. All of the diplomas are laid out on a table. One family comes out at a time, gets the diploma, a photo is taken, socially distanced. They get back in the car. So many different creative ideas to be able to give that sense of closure, and where possible, get onto campus, even if it's just in the driveway. And then there are, of course, plans to bring those kids together as soon as that is possible in the healthiest possible way. So whether that be the fall or next spring or next summer, whenever that is, they're really committed to bringing those cohorts together so that they can see each other and have that face-to-face experience as well.
Nice. Suzanne.
Well, I can't disclose. The audience might be listening. There's some stuff that's sort of secret that's happening. But I love the drive. I'm going to actually, poor Greenwood, I'm going to call them and say, I love that drive-in idea. Uh-oh, that's awesome. But yeah, I think the thing that's great is they're committed to getting everybody together in person as soon as it's safe. So there's an August date that's been set and then a Thanksgiving date. So at some point or another, the students will get to see each other. And the phenomenon, I think, I'm not sure if it's at every school, but a whole whack of students tend to go to the same institution afterwards. So the good news is that as soon as they can see each other on campus at university, a lot of them will be together again. But it's so heartbreaking. So thank you for all the schools for what you're doing to try and have that closure, because it is so important.
Great. So a couple of questions that have come in around testing. So you mentioned IB testing, David. They were wondering about AP, course exams, and a couple of questions around SSAT or admissions testing. You want to handle that, David?
So let me start with, again, I'll only speak to my institution. The only boys who are writing exams this year at my institution are boys in year 11, and they're writing exams. They're doing them virtually, obviously. We're not holding exams for boys in other grades. And the IB diploma exams were canceled by the IB themselves. So that was a pretty major change, and something that, we sort of held our breath wondering how were they going to make this work. In terms of testing on the other end, on the admissions end, I think that certainly many schools and a number of schools in Toronto use the SSAT still as an admissions requirement, certainly for older grades. SSAT is responding, I think, to both the situation that's going on right now, but more importantly to, I think, the marketplace, and we'll be offering an online version of that. And so I think that for some of us, that means we breathe a little bit of a sigh of relief. But certainly in primary or in our case, the preparatory school, we actually do most of our own testing on our own. And I think that's the challenging piece, is how are we going to find where are we going to find an alternative, and what's that alternative going to be? And most of the schools, if I think about the Toronto schools, most of the schools do some form of testing. And, in our case, typically that testing happens in December and January. And, I just do not anticipate that I'm going to be able to bring 200, grade 5 and grade 6 boys onto campus for testing. So we're going to have to find, I think, a virtual alternative. And we're certainly looking to that piece right now. I think if families are, dying for an answer at this point in time, what we're going to look like in September, I don't think there's any schools that are quite ready to give that firm answer as yet. Although in my case, I'll say, look, for grade 7 and above, we'll still happily accept the SSAT, and they can write that virtually. But in terms of other tests, it's a bit early still to know where we're going to land. But again, I was on a call yesterday with 7 or 8 other admissions directors from Toronto, and we're sort of all like staring at each other. So what are you going to use? What are you going to use? And, compiling our list of, here's where we're looking. So, it may end up actually helping families in the long run, that maybe we consolidate a little bit, but we'll see.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we're recommending on our end at Prepskills that families really just use the pre-COVID standards, right? So assume that COVID doesn't exist, wouldn't that be nice? And prepare accordingly. And then anything that happens and changes is just a bonus, right?
Yeah, agreed.
Good
advice.
Charmaine, you're on mute.
There we are, talking to myself. Holy smokes, this time goes by quickly. This happens all the time, how fast the call goes. One of the things I just wanted to pull together, we're going to go to our final question in a moment. So I'm going to give all our guests a heads up so you can think about this. We're going to be getting a 1-sentence tip from each of you, or a sort of go forward tip. But one of the things that I wanted to ask as we sort of pull this together. There's been lots of conversation today about the importance of relationships and staying connected to the schools. Some blessings that are coming out of this in terms of relationships that are flourishing and families having time to spend together. I heard you all talk about the fact that families and students are actually learning some valuable life skills as we all go through this together, learning how to deal with change, learning how to deal with situations that are very, very different than last year. So there's some definite life skills that I think are going to benefit our students in terms of their futures, not only as students, but as employees. And I'd love to just quickly hear from any of you that want to comment on sort of the future of education and the future of work. What can we do to help our students prepare and develop their sort of future forward skills so that they're learning these skills to take in not only to their academics, but to their future life as employees and leaders in their community? Any thoughts on that?
Well, I think that we're seeing right now an example of how the world is changing, and that being able to regurgitate information that was known 50 years ago is not helping us solve the kinds of problems, real life problems that are happening right now and will continue to happen in the future. So we know that education needs to support students to be amazing problem solvers, to be able to think outside of the box, to be able to reposition their thinking and to invent new information rather than just consume existing information. I think in addition to that, and just picking up on your theme a little bit, Charmaine, we need students to be courageous and curious and to be compassionate in a world that is continually changing. And I think that these are the kinds of values that you'll see reflected in schools today. It's really important because the world is not standing still. Schools need to be nimble and ready to change all the time. And I think we've seen evidence of that in the last couple of months.
Thank you.
I mean, I don't want to take an opportunity for a shameless plug, but I have to admit, as I was listening to you speak, I thought, oh my goodness, she's describing the International Baccalaureate. And I think that at the core of what the IB is, it's about problem solving, it's about relationships. So I think, I think in the case of what is part of sort of our curriculum or our day-to-day as a school, these are the issues that our kids are dealing with. And I think that they're well served by the framework that the IB provides to find solutions to those questions and those issues. And I think I would also, I would also say that I think, young people today they're pretty adaptable, and when we may struggle with some of this stuff, again, I think about the 4-year-olds or 5-year-olds who are all patiently on Skype, or on Zoom, ready for their opportunity to speak. They're going to manage. They're going to adapt. That's who they are.
Yeah. Thank you, Suzanne. What's your
so
thoughts
if I look at the transition point from high school to post-secondary, my one piece of advice would be for students and parents: study something you're interested in. Don't study something because the end result is going to be a job. There's a great post from Santa Ano, who is the president of UBC, and he actually said, I forget the title of the article, but he has an arts degree and also a science degree. And he said his liberal arts degree makes him a better researcher, a better administrator, a better parent. And it's actually the liberal arts folks that are going to help us get through these times, I think, in a lot of ways, because we're reshaping society. The new normal is not going to look, hopefully, like it did before, because there have to be people that it's not about profit so much all the time. It's about humanity overall. So studying what you interest is going to help you have a bigger impact on your immediate surrounding in the world, I think, than studying in business to get a job. If you like business, go for it, but don't do that just because it's the job.
Yeah, well said. Thank you. All right, I'm just going to share what we've got coming up next and give our great panelists a moment or two to think about their one word or one sentence takeaway tip or inspiration for our students. We've got a number of really great webinars lined up as part of our series, which I'll talk about, but we wanted to put up a slide that provided you with the contact information for our 3 guests today. So these are the websites. You'll also receive that information and some additional resources that I talked about earlier when you receive the follow-up email. It will all be in there together. And of course, when you're watching the recording, you'll also see this information there. So please check them out. And of course, our weekly webinars on Wednesdays at noon Eastern time. We have one on June 3rd about what private schools are looking for in terms of their admission committees. What are they looking for? And June 10th, we have a series related to parenting. And then June 17th, we're talking about virtual volunteering. How do you get those co-op or experience opportunities in a world that we might not be able to easily do that because we're sort of still in that time of physical distancing. And then we're going to be talking about U.S. college admission processes and standardized testing and private school admissions. So lots of great information that continues to come up through these webinars. And just a reminder that September 19th is Virtual PrepConnect. Joanna, did you want to say anything about Virtual PrepConnect while I've got the slide up there?
It's an opportunity to really get more information about the private school landscape. So they can find that information on the website. We're excited about the virtual.
Perfect, thank you. And I'm going to pass it over now to our panelists, and I'm also going to put up a screen with Joanna's contact information on here as well. If you're looking to book a call with Joanna or the Prepskills team, please feel free to contact them at Prepskills, and here's a direct booking call link where you can actually directly book a call with Joanna, and that will also be in the handout packages. So stay connected. Don't struggle with your questions. There are people here to help. We got them on this panel today. All right, so Suzanne, what is your one word or one sentence tip or word of inspiration or wisdom that people can take away after today?
This too shall pass. Hang in there.
Hang in there. Yes, this too shall pass. Thank you, Suzanne. David, what about you?
Well, I could be here for an hour, but I guess my one night, I would just say trust yourself, and trust your instincts and trust yourself. Whether it's about schools or about the current opportunity, trust yourself.
Wonderful, thank you. Patti?
My word is connection. You know, education is all about relationships. To find the right school, to find the right fit, talk to the people that you know, talk to your family, your colleagues, your friends, and then, as David said, make connections with multiple schools to find the one that's just right for you. Connect.
Thank you. Joanna?
I would say growth. I would say this is the time for growth, and success is really about resourcefulness. And so this has given us an opportunity to connect, share ideas, and hopefully an opportunity to help so many families as they navigate this really uncertain time, and in terms of private school fit, find what's right for their child.
Beautiful.
Good.
And I would say, you know, reach out. We don't have to go through this alone. There's the hashtag in this together. And, you know, I'm just going to close with sharing. I read a recent research report about resilience, and what you all offered as your final tip, it was actually in that research report in some way. And they talked about one of the most important elements of helping get people through changing times and transitions is connection, trusting in your own skills and ability, having that mindset that things will move forward. Everything isn't going to stop, and you know, being able to take these opportunities to learn. So it's almost like the 4 of you wrote that research report. When I'm listening to your tip, I thought, I feel like I just read this somewhere.
What a panel. What a panel.
What a panel. I agree.
And good for you, Dave, for putting up with 4 really strong women on this panel. But you're used to that at home too, right?
I'm good.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much to our guests for joining us. Thank you all for listening today. For those of you that are listening today or listening later on the replay, thank you for joining us. We will look forward to seeing you. Again, thanks, Joanna, for putting this great webinar series together to connect families and experts. And we look forward to next time. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.